The Force has never meant one thing. To the Jedi it is harmony, a binding energy that surrounds, penetrates, and connects all living things. To the Sith it is domination, a well of power that rewards strength and punishes weakness. But even among these ancient orders, there have always been outliers, those who don't merely use the Force, but those that reinterpret it. Those who see it not as an energy or a power or even a destiny, but as a philosophy. One of the most famous examples of this is Darth Ruin, the exiled Jedi Master who came to see the Force itself as a malevolent god. She believed the Force was an uncaring manipulator, a will that used both Jedi and Sith alike as puppets in a cosmic game. To Ruin, the Force was not to be served or obeyed, it was to be defied. But today, this is not the story of Darth Ruin. This is about something far more disturbing. Another philosopher of the Force who didn't see the Force as a tyrant, but as something worse. A mirror. This is the story of Darth Ruin, a Jedi Master turned Sith cult leader who believed that only his mind could truly comprehend the Force. A man who thought that the galaxy, the Jedi, the Sith, and all other sentient life were simply wrong. A man who convinced 50 Jedi to abandon the Order with words alone, who walked among the ashes of the Sith Empire and resurrected that empire through belief, and who became so feared that his own followers turned on him, terrified he would consume them all in a ritual to ascend beyond mortality itself. This is not a story of war, a story of conquest, or a story of lightsaber duels. This is the story of what happens when someone is so certain in their own truth that they can make others believe it too. This is the story of Darth Ruin. Before he was Ruin, he was known as Phannius, a Jedi Master in the final century of the new Sith Wars, and even then he was dangerous. But he was dangerous not because of what he did, but because of how he thought. Phannius wasn't like other Jedi. He didn't challenge the code with emotion, or violate the rules of attachment. His heresy was more subtle, and far more insidious. Phannius believed that reality itself was subjective, and that truth, morality, even the Force were constructs to be bent around perception, and more specifically, his perception. Phannius began to argue that all sentient beings, Jedi, Sith, civilians, rulers, teachers, they were all incapable of understanding the Force, that their interpretations were childish, that their codes, their philosophies, their moralities were flawed lenses through which they distorted what the Force truly was. And only he, through his superior intellect, could see the Force clearly. This was not arrogance in the typical sense of the Sith, it was something worse. He embraced solipsism, the belief that the self is all that truly exists. Phannius didn't just believe he was more intelligent than the rest of the Jedi. He began to believe that only his consciousness was the real one, and that everyone else was just practicing in a collective illusion too primitive to understand. Because of this, the Jedi Council grew very uneasy. They attempted to contain his teachings, to debate him, to ignore him. Nothing worked. Because Phannius wasn't just some raving heretic. He was brilliant, charismatic, thoughtful, a master of argument and persuasion. He didn't shout down at his critics, he dismantled them slowly, publicly, and always with a smile. Eventually though, Phannius would depart the Jedi Order, not in exile, not in shame. He walked away because he believed the Order had nothing left to teach him, that no one did. And on that day that he left behind a message too, a message that would haunt Jedi historians for centuries. The Force shall free me. Not just us, not the Jedi, not the Sith, me. After his departure from the Jedi, Phannius disappeared from all official record, but he didn't go into hiding, not right away. He remained active in public discourse for some time, not as a Sith Lord, but as a rogue philosopher. He wrote, taught, and debated. He gave lectures in forgotten corners of the galaxy, and most dangerously, he listened. He listened to those that were disillusioned, angry, curious, and misunderstood. Over the course of months, perhaps even years, he began to draw many followers. Not fanatics, not warriors, but thinkers, idealists, students of the Force who, like him, felt suffocated by doctrine and tradition. And then something unprecedented happened. 50 Jedi left when he officially departed the Jedi Order and laid down his title. There were no battles, there was no bloodshed, it was only words. The Jedi that followed him not because they were promised power or wealth or revenge, but because he convinced them that they were already living a lie, that the Force is not what they had been taught that it was, that they could become part of something deeper, more true. This was not a seduction, it was ideological conversion. Phannius offered them meaning, a new understanding, a reason to believe that their doubts were not weakness, but rather that it was clarity. And once he had them, he vanished. The Jedi were left fractured, afraid. They had seen many embrace the dark side before, but none like this, never through pure ideology. Never through persuasion alone. Many historians would later compare his fall to that of Dooku, another charismatic Jedi who left the Order and influenced the galaxy with concepts bigger than violence. But even Dooku had relied on power, prestige, and even war. But Phannius didn't raise his saber at all. He raised a mirror, and he asked others if they liked what they saw. And it was after this that Phannius ceased to be, and Ruin was born. Darth Ruin. After orchestrating the defection of 50 Jedi, Darth Ruin disappeared into the stars, but his mission was far from over. But again, he was different. He didn't raise an army. He didn't declare war on the Republic. What he did was far more patient, far more terrifying. He went on a pilgrimage to the graves of the old Sith Empire. The galaxy, after nearly 1,000 years of Jedi dominance, had long since forgotten many of these places. Worlds like Ziost, Korriban, Thule, and Umbria, they had all become little more than ghost stories. The Sith were dead, their teachings were fractured, their followers reduced to cults, tribes, isolated warlords who clung to scraps of forgotten doctrine. And it was among these remnants that Darth Ruin preached. He didn't approach the lost Sith as a conqueror, he came as a prophet. He told them that the Sith had failed not because they were weak, but because they were wrong, because they had misunderstood the Force, because they had corrupted themselves with obsession, tradition, and rivalry, and that Darth Ruin alone could lead them back. Some attempted to kill him, others knelt. Slowly though, tribe by tribe, Ruin began to rebuild the Sith. But it wasn't the Sith of old, it wasn't the Brotherhood of Darkness, or the legacy of Naga Sadow. This was something new. He offered them not just strength, but meaning, a grand unifying theory of the dark side. He promised them that they were not just survivors, that they were chosen, that they would become a part of something eternal, something that transcended war and death and weakness. And whether out of fear, awe, or belief, many followed. This is what made Ruin so deadly. He didn't just gather Force wielders, he converted them. He built a cult on power alone, but something greater. He built a cult on faith. In the shadows of dead empires, Ruin raised a new one, not built on fear, but on worship. He didn't just revive the Sith, he made himself the reason that they existed. By the time Darth Ruin had gathered and then scattered the tribes under one banner, Darth Ruin had achieved what no other Dark Lord had accomplished since the days of the Ancients. He had resurrected the Sith. But the vision he offered wasn't one of galactic conquest, not at first though. It wasn't about vengeance on the Jedi. It wasn't about balance or revenge or even ruling. Ruin's new Sith were not united under a philosophy of strength through conflict as the Brotherhood of Darkness would one day be, or through cunning as Darth Bane would later restore. Darth Ruin's Sith were unique. Ruin's Sith were united by belief in one being. That being was Darth Ruin. And the longer that they followed him, the more they realized something was terribly wrong. To Ruin, the Sith were not allies, not students, not even tools. To Darth Ruin, the Sith were nothing, and he made no secret of this belief. To Ruin, they were fragments of a failed galaxy, lesser shadows orbiting his brilliance. They existed only to reflect his power, to affirm his vision. Where previous Sith sought to strengthen their apprentices, Ruin belittled his. Where most Sith demanded loyalty, Ruin demanded irrelevance. He didn't even call his apprentices at all. He called them squires. Ruin was not interested in building an empire that would last. He was interested in proving that he was the only being that was worthy of the Force, and that all others were expendable. Even his chosen squire, Erraticus, was never truly trusted. Ruin saw him and all others as placeholders, manifestations of a reality that only existed to serve his self-mythologized ascension. This wasn't just tyranny, it was theological madness. And the longer his cult served him, the more they began to suffer. He began to sacrifice followers without explanation, executed loyalists at random. He would test their faith not to purify them, but to affirm his own importance. And when the whispers began, when the other Sith began to fear what would consume them all would be some sort of ritual that only Ruin knew about, some self-deification, Ruin did not address them. Because to him, there was no threat. To believe anyone else could betray him meant believing that someone else even mattered. And this is what made Darth Ruin really terrifying. Ruin wasn't pretending to be a god. He believed he already was one. In the end, Ruin's reign was as brief as it was apocalyptic. He had accomplished the impossible, the resurrection of the Sith. He had forged them into a single coherent ideology for the first time in centuries. he had sparked a galactic conflict that would become known as the New Sith Wars, a war that would stretch across 1,000 years and see the Republic collapse into fear and chaos. And yet Ruin himself would not live to see the first of any great battle. He was too certain, too invulnerable in his own mind. He held his disciples in such low regard, he viewed them as literal nothings, that he never even considered the possibility that they would strike out against him. His single-minded philosophy of self-interest, his absolute monomania, he was consumed by the one thing that even the Sith cannot discard: caution. And so quietly they conspired, not for power from their master, not for vengeance, but for something far more pure: survival. His followers had tracked him across dead worlds, believed in his message, surrendered their autonomy to his will, but now they feared for their existence. Some of the Sith believed Ruin intended to drain their life essence in a ritual to transcend the mortal plane. Others believed that he had already begun. Whether these were delusions or well-founded truths, though, it didn't matter. The cult that he had created, the galaxy he had rebuilt in his own image, turned on him. And Darth Ruin, the philosopher god who believed he alone could wield the Force, was murdered. Not by the Jedi, not by the Republic commandos, but by his own followers. And he never saw it coming. Because how could nothing kill a god? Ruin's legacy did not end with his death. If anything, it only began here. The Sith had reawakened, and they would continue to wage a war on the Republic for 1,000 years. His cult would fracture into new sects and new warlords, each echoing pieces of his vision, but none holding it completely. Because how could they? The Republic would be dragged into century after century of conflict. Jedi armies would rise and fall, and darkness would settle over the galaxy like a plague. Ruin's madness became a virus, and the galaxy became the virus's host. Though he never raised a fleet or conquered any world, Ruin's beliefs, his certainty in his own supremacy, this ignited a conflict that would take a millennium to extinguish. And by the time that war finally ended at the Battle of Ruusan, the Sith were thought destroyed for good. Only one, though, would remain in secret: a Sith who understood exactly what had gone wrong. Darth Ruin left the Jedi Order to pursue his own philosophy of self-interest, and gave rise to a 1,000-year war that concluded at Ruusan. And who was among the last to hold the Darth title, until I have claimed it again. To Darth Bane, Ruin was both a warning and a lesson. A Sith who shattered the Jedi not by war, but with words, and united the Sith not with fear, but with faith. But also a Sith who fell not to his enemies, but to his own delusion. Where Ruin believed in self above all, Bane believed in the system, the rule of two. He forged it to correct the chaos that Ruin had spawned. A system where every Sith would be tested through combat, survival, not through worship. But perhaps the most haunting thing about Darth Ruin is that he almost succeeded. Had he not fallen into madness, had he not dismissed his own followers as insects, he may have reshaped the galaxy forever. He may have become the living nexus of the Force that he had imagined. A god in all but name. Because in the end, Ruin didn't fall because he was wrong. He fell because he believed only he could be right. So remember this: the Sith do not always rise with fire. Sometimes they rise with thought. And the Force does not always serve balance. Sometimes it becomes a mirror, one that reflects back only ego and those that dare to claim it. Darth Ruin didn't need to kill to corrupt. He just needed to convince you that no one else mattered. And in a galaxy ruled by belief, that is all that it takes. Honestly, in my opinion, Ruin may be one of the most genuinely insane and terrifying Sith in all of the Star Wars mythos. Yes, Sidious was a manipulative monster. Vitiate literally consumed worlds. But Ruin wasn't just evil. Ruin was gone, completely out of his mind. He didn't just believe he was right, he believed no one else even existed in any meaningful way. That's what makes him so scary. He didn't want to rule the galaxy. He wanted to erase it and replace it with himself. So as always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and please leave in the comments down below what you think of Darth Ruin. And as always, may the Force be with you, and maybe don't let it be with Ruin. Have a great day.